Welcome once again to the Science of Community track. I am so thrilled to introduce to you Cathy Richards, who's going to talk about this project, which I think exemplifies some of the quiet courage that open source software is really known for. And I just can't wait to hear this presentation and to share it all with you. So thank you so much, Cathy.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And as Kalea mentioned, a lot of the talks I've already heard, I'm like, ooh, that's a part of my prezzo. So this is great. Can tie it all together. But as Kalea mentioned, my name is Cathy Richards, and I'm the Civic Science Fellow and Data Inclusion Specialist at Open Environmental Data Project. OEDP, the full blurb, the proper blurb is that we build spaces to grow the global conversation on environmental data, access and use, effectively being a bridge between the multiple worlds that oftentimes have to come together to conduct environmental research. And today, I'd like to share with you a new project that we've been working on. Justin's not here, but similarly, trying to take a year plus of research and turn it into a 20-minute thing. So we'll see how this goes. But we've been working on it for the last year. It's called DigitCore, or the Digital Toolkit for Collaborative Environmental Research, which I rarely use. It's always DigitCore. But very quickly, the agenda. First, I'll share a little bit about the project so that you get a general idea of what we were working on. Then we'll talk through some of our findings, / the emerging themes and patterns. And then I'll present a little bit of a spoiler of the toolkit and where we plan to go in the future. Alrighty, so to start, in 2024, in the before times, OEDP conducted research to explore the role of open source technologies and open infrastructures in collaborative environmental research. We were particularly interested in how open tools and their associated processes enable or hinder frontline communities in studying social environmental processes that sustain or degrade the planetary commons. A lot of words, but just generally environmental research. We had 3 primary audiences. So they were open source technologists, much like yourselves, but also those that worked within organizations, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Sometimes they were, I guess like the other group would be what they called developers for hire, right? They have a contract, they deliver it, and then they walk away. So they have to think about, handing off the project as opposed to being a part of the organization. Sometimes they were developers that were working on software. Sometimes it was hardware. Sometimes it was sensors. Or sometimes it was all of the above. So it really was, developers that were doing all the things, or networking, connecting sensors in the middle of the forest, whatever it might be. And then we also had community organizations. Quite often those were civic science organizations like Open Air AQ, Open Air Quality. I don't know if anyone has heard of them, or others working specifically on the front line, right? So they had a different set of needs. And then we had researchers. Typically they were from universities, but often they were also like community researchers working within orgs. So really it was a bit of a Venn diagram all the time when we were talking to different people. We're like, this person kind of fits here, but they also kind of fit here. But our aim for the last few months has been to develop a toolkit based on our findings that cater to these different audiences and their specific needs. And so through focus groups and other conversations, we actually surfaced 22 patterns and grouped them into 6 themes. Note that we call them patterns because we modeled them after the design pattern language, which many of you, if you're coders, you already know. For those that don't, I like to sometimes describe them as tiny recipes or best practices or common things that surface in our research. But for the most part, we just often describe them as like common conditions that came up. Like other design patterns, each pattern provides readers with solutions and accompanying resources to help implement those solutions. If you're new to design patterns, feel free to raise your hand if you are. This might get confusing, but once I get into the proper visuals, it will be a little bit better. Also like to note that the solutions and resources, so essentially all the green, were also surfaced through conversations, through the research itself. But also we had a few feedback periods with the community organizations, all the audiences that we worked with. We sat down with them, like, this is what we heard, validated it, made sure that that we were accurate with what we were saying. From these patterns, we also outlined a set of values, which I'll get into. Those are across the top, as we wanted to make sure that all the solutions and all the resources that we provided also kind of adhered to this like open, transparent, values-oriented work that everyone was doing. Our hope, kind of like a little bit of a spoiler, but our hope is that this toolkit will be a living thing. and I actually left a note for myself to laugh at this point, because we all say that we want to have this living documentation that will continue to be updated until the end of time. We hope so. We do hope so, and I will present to you later some mechanisms and things that we want from the communities. But for the most part, it's also like outside of people contributing to it, solutions and resources, it's also going to be open. Currently licensed under Creative Commons, so people will be open, like free to remix it, take it, translate it. We will be translating it in Spanish, as we've worked a lot with organizations in Argentina. But also other languages, we're open to that as well. All right, so the values. Some of the values that surface in our research include openness is tailored. Digital tools are used in unique contexts where culture, geography, ecosystems, politics, and economics collide. Open infrastructure should provide situational flexibility regarding how information is collected, analyzed, maintained, protected, used, and made available or not for sharing. Second, we have open infrastructure prioritizes mobilization. Open technologies are implemented by individuals and organizations whose role is to motivate, engage, and encourage communities. Open practices, tools, and objects should enable action. Flexibility is a feature. Organizing work needs to adapt to potentially rapid and urgent shifts in policy, politics, or environmental conditions, another lull. Relatedly, communities understand how external attention to the issues they face comes in cycles. As we've seen the last 6 months, there are moments where environmental research gets more attention. Other times, other issues that are on fire at the moment get more attention. So understanding that. And so the development of open infrastructure should be responsive to the varying timelines and circumstances that we have to deal with. The other one, open infrastructure upholds place-based care. So environmental justice efforts generate strategies to take care of places and the people who live there. Open infrastructure must be developed in conversation with and in relation to the community practices of care. And the second to last one, open infrastructure meets the demand for readily available information. Open infrastructure and tools should facilitate the accessibility and availability of information in a timely manner, enabling communities to make informed decisions. And the last one, open infrastructure addresses prohibitive costs, which I think was mentioned in a previous one. I think it was Mike talked about how much savings we have. Open infrastructure makes it possible to produce, share, maintain, and use information in an accessible way. But let's finally get into the themes and patterns. So for each of these next 6 slides, you'll see the theme across the top, patterns across the side. Why is that there? Okay, that's fine. That spacing is a little weird. I know why, because it's hidden. There we go. That's cool. That was weird. So yeah, as I mentioned, you'll see the theme across the top, patterns across the left. For each of these themes, I pulled out one pattern and its solutions and the resources, so you can kind of get an idea of how the rest of the toolkit will look. Sorry. But knowingly, there's only so much we can fit on a slide, so I just pulled out a select sentence here or there to make sure you kind of got the general gist. But for example, the first theme that we found is around ensuring benefit to frontline communities, which means going beyond access and inclusion to prioritizing ownership and collaboration. Here the patterns are enhancing frontline communities' agency. This is the one that's been pulled out. So communities' agency is respected when they are able to lead or co-lead in decision making. Second pattern is respecting frontline communities' time and effort, then reducing harm to communities, and holding outsiders accountable. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Sorry about that. In the case of the first pattern, a solution includes collaborating on goals over time. For each of these solutions, we provided accompanying resources to help support readers during implementation. So for example, Animiki's, I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing it right, pathfinding process supports in the co-design of technologies, specifically with the indigenous community. So hopefully you can see the colors, very light yellow, but yellow goes with yellow, pink goes with pink. And on the toolkit, when you select that solution, you'll be taken to that resource and other resources that could not show on this slide. And so for the second case, for the second solution, we have securing consent before sharing solutions before sharing data or information. And a resource for that is the Open Teams data use documents, which offer examples such as the agriculturalist Bill of Data Rights and the data hosting and storage agreement. So one of the key things that we wanted to do is not just tell people what to do, tell people what the solutions are, tell you, you should collaborate, but how, right? We want to provide you with resources to actually help you get there. There might be multiple resources for each solution. Also, one of the things in terms of the back end of the toolkit that we wanted to make sure that, it was as modular as possible. It's a little bit dry. So, potentially one of those resources might also appear linked to another pattern. And we fortunately only have to update it in one place. But yeah, as mix and match as possible. Next one, I love this. All right, here we go. Apparently, I put on a bunch of animation and never finished. The next theme is around practicing openness. Openness is a core principle of open infrastructure, but its meaning and implementation can vary widely. I think it was Justin that mentioned this a little bit, or also Mike, that's like, which company is 100% open? One of the things that we found, and this actually has changed several times, but originally this pattern was going to be called There's No Pure Open, because we found that sometimes they would, a community or a project would be using open software, but proprietary sensors or proprietary hardware. And sometimes open just meant that they were transparent with the community about what was being shared. And the process was transparent and we shared the data, whatever it might mean. So one of the things that we learned, and actually was one of the learnings of the project, because we definitely went in saying, okay, what's all the open stuff that people are using, and let's assess them, and let's look at Python, and let's look at these tools, and let's look at all these things. And then we learned that there was no pure open. So we had to kind of reframe that. But essentially, some of the patterns that we found include, as I mentioned, open means different things to different people. Different interpretations of open, whether referring to open data, open source software, or open engagement practices, can influence a project's direction or lead to disagreements in design. The other patterns, guys, I'm sorry. The other patterns are mandated versus meaningful openness, pressure to commercialize, and openness as a daily practice. And lastly, the limits of open tool usability for frontline communities. As before, in the case of the first pattern, some of the solutions surfaced include writing a charter on openness, explicitly defining what openness means in the context of your project. So as I mentioned, developers might go into a project saying, this is open, it's fine, because in theory it is open. The software might be open, whatever it might be, but maybe the sensor, the only one available that was easy to install, was proprietary. And then other people would be looking at the project and say, this isn't actually open. Or maybe the community would come in and they're like, you're not really being open or transparent with what you're doing. Where's our data going? Who are you sharing it with, et cetera? So we found that, one of the key solutions for this first one on open meaning different things to different people is writing a charter, just kind of with all things in life, just laying out how it is that you're defining these things. The second solution would be providing context for shared data or going beyond accessible formats. As before, a good resource for writing charters would be our own nice little plug, OEDP's Community Data Playbook, which has case studies on community-based or collaborative environmental data efforts that demonstrate different needs, interests, etc. We also have an accompanying resource library, which includes resources such as a template for creating READMEs that are more values-oriented, and if you're working with any communities. And lastly, a good resource for providing context, and this one's very environmental research specific, would be NFDI's ontology collection, which includes several ontologies, or essentially frameworks, I guess we'll call it, frameworks for data collection related to environmental data. So we've been scouring the internet, scouring as many people as you can't scour people, talking to as many people as you possibly can. Can we scour? Who knows? Talking to as many people as we can to see, this ontology one has been huge. It's do you have any air quality ontologies? What about water? Cool. So it's been great. It's we're hoping to create this resource where people can just find all the things they need. Again, I love this. The next theme is that data does not equal information. So open infrastructure should go beyond making data available. It should also aim to make it understandable, usable, and trustworthy. I think this one kind of came out of just conversations with community members. As I mentioned before, there's like this trust thing that has to happen. And quite often, for some people, it's enough to just like publish the PDF on the website or just share the numbers, potentially in an even more in like a big chart, and say, yeah, we've done our part to share back with the community. But that was our big thing for us. Like, data does not equal information. Data does not, just the data alone is not enough for the community to work with. The first pattern in this theme is that adequate metadata requires capacity. So meaning metadata or information about the data is essential for enabling reuse, ensuring transparency, and supporting long-term impact. Some solutions include planning for metadata early, like integrating metadata creation into the initial phase of project planning. And then the other solution for reusing and adapting standards is the Dublin core generator, which really helps with metadata creation. I love this. Who did this? That was me. The next theme is academic culture and norms. And that's one of my favorite ones, and the one I usually used when explaining this project to others. Everyone is working on a different timeline. Academic researchers, they probably have like the research in phases. Like, we're doing data collection and we're synthesizing and then we're doing this. Developers, we're like, let's talk in sprints. And then community organizations, they have to kind of handle things as they come. They're very responsive. Someone is in their office and they need to be able to handle it. As you all can imagine, there's some conflict there and things are going to come up. So, just kind of making sure that responsive and accessible open infrastructure kind of takes all these needs into account. The patterns in this theme include frontline communities and academia's differing norms, timeframes, and practices. Like I mentioned, these are like tiny blurbs, but other things that we've put in the toolkit are, in research, in academia, it's like a lot of get published. Cite, get into that journal, get as many citations as you possibly can. When you're talking to, a community organization, that's not the thing. They need to submit something to the grant, to the funder. So just, things like that. So in the case of the first pattern, some of the solutions and resources that we provided were, translating findings for action. So sharing results in accessible, digestible, and jargon-free formats. The Data Ethics Toolkit actually has a worksheet for report backs to communities. And for the second one, aligning research outputs with community priorities. And that second resource also kind of helps organizations kind of get that alignment. Cool. And again, this was on purpose, actually, now that I think about it. The next theme is around situational collaboration practices, meaning the success and longevity of open infrastructure often depends on effective collaborations. These, in turn, rely on governance mechanisms that match the needs of the project. So in this case, the first pattern is around overly complex governance. One of the things, amazingly, that we found in our research was that there were cases where it was just a little too much. I guess one of the ways that people have described it is like there's an IKEA instruction book, and then there's like something else that is just way harder, and you have to figure out where you're breaking the rules or who you need to talk to, and there's so many levels. So we did find cases of governance getting a little too complex, and that kind of resulted in less collaboration. So for that one in particular, solutions, of course, adapting flexible minimal governance structures, which seems kind of self-explanatory, but often is not. So we did provide resources such as a community rule toolkit, which provides guidance for structuring collaborative governance documents and things like that. Separately, for the second one, for including non-technical collaborators, we have OKFN's Open Data Governance and Open Governance. The full title is Interplayer Disconnect, which offers insights on aligning data practices. The other patterns in this theme include partners and clients have different needs, iterative tool development can create instability, and planning for the future. And the last one will be around long-term sustainability, which I think I've heard a few people talk about already. The long-term viability of open infrastructure depends on securing resources for ongoing maintenance. So in our case, number one, obviously, open tools often end up in the graveyard. So we got to continue to get funding. So some of the solutions that we provided here in this case were embedding sustainability early, One of the resources was the Software Sustainability Institute, which offers guidance and tools for software lifecycle planning. The other solution for the second, the second solution was developing a plan for sharing and supporting existing tools. And for that, there's a few others, but the Open Source Way was a great guidebook we found to be really useful and really well explained for communities. And then the last two more patterns are balancing scale and specificity, which was another big thing that we found. Quite often, if a tool was made specifically for a community, it was really hard to properly open source it and have other communities adapt it. And then when it was a little bit too open source, and not too open source, but too general, it was a bit difficult for communities to adapt on their own. And then lastly, champions within civil society need more support, which is also kind of self-explanatory, but there were so many community workers doing a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the invisible labor, and we have very many solutions. So now onto the website. So the team spent a lot of time trying to understand our audiences, which I mentioned early on, and we tried to develop the toolkit in such a way that it's meant to be a unique, select your own adventure type of experience. We're still in development. It looks good though. It actually works as intended. But yeah, our hope is that, depending on if you're a researcher or if you're a developer, the site will be a different experience for you and you will get different things. So I will say, quick disclaimer, this is actually not the first page that you come across, but this is, and it's very tiny, but this is, I kind of wanted to give you an idea of this early page that we provide, where essentially the beginning of the project, we know that people don't have time to read anymore. We tried to shorten as much of the context as possible to make sure that people understood where the research came from. We have the themes as well, and then we have the audiences. So open source technologists, community groups. We also ended up, of course, with advice for funders, because you can't just simply say, we need to maintain stuff more, we need more funding. So I just kind of wanted to give you a quick overview of this so that you can see how it is. But now we'll move on to actual onboarding. So as I mentioned, we wanted to make it as user-centered as possible. So the first page, some of the things we've talked about were if someone was coming there for the first time, what is the experience that they should get, versus if they're coming here for the second, third, hopefully 10th time, they might want to skip through all this and they might have just landed somewhere else. Those are the two options. So for now, you have, tell me more. Let's go through the full process. And then there's, too long didn't read. I am going to skip right to the pattern that I need. That interested in this. One of the things we've worked with the developers around is making sure that from the local state tells the website whether the person has been here before or not. So we've also put a lot of thought into, I love this pattern, I'm a developer, I love this pattern, let me share it with someone. If it's your first time visiting, you will get, you'll see the pattern, but you also get the splash page that's but first, let's tell us about the project in the shortest form possible. You'll notice also that the last paragraph, like I mentioned, you're seeing this message because you have clicked the link to a pattern. Like I said, we really want to make sure that it's kind of a tailored experience to each person. Hopefully all on local computer. No tracking, none of that. But yeah, once you do that, you can then choose to continue with onboarding. You're prompted to select the audience that you're most aligned with. You can select more than one, of course. I will say very quickly, this isn't the final text. They're uploading the content as we speak, so this is really very fresh. But we worked with a great team, and they were able to even take our content and formulate it and create designs based off content that we hadn't even created. And then lastly, you select your interests or your themes. As I mentioned before, the site itself will be tailored to what you're interested in. So if you're an open source developer interested in, community collaboration, things like that, you can select that specifically. But now the pattern page. So this is essentially the same stuff that I shared with you before, but formatted a little bit differently. Across the top is the pattern name. You'll note add to carrier bag right below the pattern name, because we also wanted to make sure that people can kind of have their own shopping cart and have a toolkit that's completely tailored to them. Even if you got 10 patterns that apply to developers, maybe only 5 are relevant to you at the moment. So you can save them as you go. I'll show you a little bit more of the carrier bag in a bit. Oh, I know,
We
right?
gotta get to an end. I
I
knew we should
know.
have made you like on a longer slot. I should have like twisted your arm.
It's fine. It's fine. I will fly through it. Very quickly, yeah, this continuing with the pattern page, the carrier bag, as I mentioned, which you could export as JSON or share, things like that. Multiple options for that. Search pages that also tie back to everything. So it's more, not just a website, but more of a database. And then very quickly, what's next? We still have a lot of work to do. Some of the things are, open tools act as shared utilities. So we do need to continue to work on these things. Hardware and physical building blocks of science, tools like low-cost sensors, open hardware kits, etc., still very necessary. And I'll actually skip a few because I know I'm running on time. But lastly, there's still more work to do. We still need to do more to translate the value of openness into contexts where communities, especially those on the front lines, need more information. We need a more holistic eye on infrastructure. Tech is great, but we still have to work with communities. We've heard this a million times. We need more funding, which is why we ended up with a fourth audience, which was funders, unexpected. And yeah, we need to keep pushing for change. Those are the big things. Okay, now we're done.
All right, let's
Fly.
take our speaker.
Thank you.
All right. We don't have time for questions, but
Yeah,
will you be
no worries.
here?
I will be here.
The day? Okay, so people need
Very
to
quickly, yeah.
definitely look you up
Yeah.
and connect. We gotta let Laura take the stage.
No worries.
But yes,
Thank
you
you,
so
dear.
much, Cathy.
No, thank you.
Awesome.
Right.